Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited for today's program with the Institute of Asset Management Leadership, a white paper. And I just want to note our esteemed panel today: Mark Knight, Senior Managing Consultant at 1898 & Co., Mark DeClercq, President of Applied Asset Management Consultants, Inc., Ursula Bryan, CEO of the IAM Institute of Asset Management, Jim Dieter, CEO of the Asset Leadership Network, and Mike Bordenaro, Executive Director of the Asset Leadership Network. And with that, I think, Mike, would you like to say a bit more to our guests?
Yes, thank you, Nick, and welcome to everyone to this first program that's a collaborative effort between the Institute of Asset Management and the Asset Leadership Network. We're very happy to start our relationship with this program and with this white paper. And the white paper actually was an idea that Mark Knight began with. So we're very happy. Mark Knight is a senior fellow, or is a fellow at the Institute of Asset Management, and he's going to start things off. Mark?
All right. Thanks, Mike. Actually, it's a bit of a convoluted story as to how we got here, I guess, because several years back, Chris Roberts, the current president of the IAM, was the chair of the US chapter, and he had asked me to restart the technical committee to restart knowledge development. And we put out a request in our newsletter to get people involved. And I guess with COVID and everything, there wasn't much traction. And then I ended up running into Mark DeClercq and Justin Manville, and the three of us started regular meetings, putting our heads together, and we actually came up with 3 paper concepts. And this was one of them, and we've had 2 of them now completed and a related one being developed. And the idea was that we develop some US-centric material, but that somehow, I guess through some kind of brain fart on my part, maybe morphed into, why don't we develop something by collaborating with another US-based organization, which led to the outreach and discussions that we had, and ended up not really being a US-centric topic at all, but a topic of broad interest, I think. And I think we were talking right before this call, and Jim often talks about the value of coordination, and I think that's one of the key kind of foundation pieces for this paper was just going back to the definition of asset management in the standard. It's the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. And I was actually looking through the material again last night. Actually, I'll come back to that, but there was, I think, 3 things
Mark,
I did want to touch on
Mark,
from an introduction.
You said brain fart. I was the one who did the brain fart. Thank you for giving us the background on how things got started. Appreciate that. Now we'll resume our regularly scheduled program that has Ursula speaking. I apologize to the panel. Okay, Ursula.
Thank you, Mike. And hello, everyone. And many thanks to Mike and Mark for their opening remarks, and also from Nick. I'm delighted to be at this session with you all, and really to hear from the principal authors who've put this paper together on asset management leadership. I'm really interested to listen to the questions that we get from the attendees. I know we've had a lot of interest with people registering for the session, so I hope everyone's been able to join, and it'd be really interesting to see what those questions are. And I'm really interested to take part in the discussion. I think there'll be some really interesting areas to discuss as we go through the session. The Institute of Asset Management co-authored the paper with the Asset Leadership Network, really to stimulate discussion and debate all about leadership and how crucial it is for asset management. As we look at the current and future opportunities and challenges that we're all presented with, I think strong collaboration is absolutely key. The Institute of Asset Management and the Asset Leadership Network have worked together on this paper, bringing both similar and diverse viewpoints. And together this has resulted in a paper and a session that I hope you find really useful and informative on such an important topic. We really want to hear your thoughts and get your views, and I'd really like to thank the Asset Leadership Network for hosting this session. And I'll now hand over to Jim, and I think Jim's going to give us a few reflections as well, so thank you.
Super. Well, hello, everyone. Glad everyone could join us today or watch this sometime in the future. Ursula's comments reminded me of my personal experience in getting involved in the development of ISO 55000. And then we started the ALN, as that the initial effort on that was coming to completion. And my outstanding takeaway was that I came from, a niche of asset management, like most of us do. And I kept being amazed how many other niches there were, and that we weren't the only people doing asset management. And that beyond that, when we all got together and talked, boy, we all just learned a lot. Being involved in the ISO process was, not a master's class, it was a doctoral class in asset management, and the best minds from around the world involved in it. And got involved in the IAM at that time, still involved in the IAM as a member. And just the IAM's ability to create just remarkable intellectual capital is stunning. So if people aren't aware of it, boy, take advantage of it. A lot is freely offered, through IAM and through the Global Forum. Just a remarkable body of knowledge. So when we started the ALN, we thought, well, they're doing that. We don't need to do that. That's why we called it a network instead of an institute, because our idea was around connecting people. So I think, this effort kind of, closes a circle on that, and brings us together, which to what I think, well, I know it's in the IAM's mission and goals, and is in the ALN mission and goals as well, which is to just create a rising tide around asset management, and to bring these concepts and principles to the widest possible market. I think we're often afraid to let on to people just how big a deal asset management is, but assets are the stage upon which we lead our lives. Natural assets, constructed assets, infrastructure assets, facilities, utilities, it goes on and on. We can't imagine our lives without assets. Obviously, the human factor is added on top of that makes it all, gives it reasons for its existence and how it's used. But it's a huge part of human existence are these assets, and from the beginning of time. Similarly, within organizations, assets and asset management concerns really cut across entire organizations. As the paper talks about, both the line of sight, the vertical integration, well, not to use the word integration again, but vertically and horizontally, which sometimes we call integration, is really important. And we talk about silos, but silos exist for a reason too. But asset management helps us and helps organizations and leadership develop a culture where those people in those silos can see the value of coordinating and cooperating, as we have done in developing this article. So coordination, hugely important. Culture, I think is, it's hard to separate leadership from culture, and the paper goes into that. And it ties together, to move forward what we're talking about when we talk about asset management. You know, a lot of us, a lot of people involved are engineers and others that have been worked in very detailed work around assets, which is hugely important. I mean, cannot be minimized. But to be able to look up and see, you know, not just, you know, the value of asset preservation to sustainability, but the value of or the value of creation from assets that can make an even bigger difference, and is where I think the most opportunity exists going forward. So thanks to the guys that wrote this. It's good. I got to see an early draft, so that was good.
And you contributed some great edits. And this is the first time I remember you saying that the assets are the stage on which we live our lives. So I think that's appropriate tie-in to the beginning of our relationship with UK-based Institute of Asset Management. Nice connection there. And that connects us back to Mark Knight, who is originally from the UK and is now based in the US outside of Boston with 1898 & Co., a division of Burns and McDonald. So Mark, want to talk about these first sections that we'll show briefly just so people can see the idea of the paper. Please download it at either the Institute of Asset Management website or the ALN website.
I will try, Mike, but I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Up with the squirrel. Well, Jim just gave me a couple of big distractions there in what he was saying, which I think is kind of relevant. So, and it comes back to the coordination, because when my youngest son was going around universities, we went to one where they gave a talk about, and I thought it was a brilliant talk, and my son thought it was boring, but it was about everything you use. Think about it. It doesn't matter what it is. It had to be designed. That takes engineers. So it was a talk about the value of engineers, but of course everything then has to be built, and then that's a huge effort in terms of supply chain coordination, asset management. And to Jim's point, we need silos because we need detailed expertise in lots of different areas, but we can't let those silos become disconnected, which again, pulls us back to the real value of asset management, which is embedded in the definition. And three things that I wanted to talk about from the introduction. One was line of sight, which Jim mentioned, aligning the top-down aspirations of an organization with the bottom-up realities of those day-to-day operational decisions. So giving those people insights into making decisions that are right for the organization, not necessarily right for me or for my department, and how do you balance all that, but at the same time giving top management insights into pragmatic goal setting. Jim talked about alignment, vertical, horizontal. The other one is temporal, which I think is easy to lose, and that's kind of hidden in the blue wheel in the IAM conceptual model, where you're looking at decisions for the entire life cycle of the asset. And in fact, as a tie back to the standard, I love collecting sound bites that I can kind of regurgitate from time to time. And one of the brilliant ones I actually picked up at the IAM's North America conference was from Lou Cripps from Denver Regional Transportation District. And he said that ISO 55000 tells you what to do. It doesn't tell you when to do it. And that's a whole rabbit hole I don't want to go into, but it's a good tie back, I think, to that temporal definition. And the other thing I just wanted to talk a bit about, which I've already done, was the definition, which we kind of we pull out and we make sure we talk about that. So I think the next section I was going to talk about was leaders existing at all levels. So that would be page 4 in the paper. And I looked at it again last night, and it's funny how you write things, then you come back and you see them with fresh eyes. And I just looked at those first 2 sentences, and to me, that first sentence on that page almost is the most powerful one in the paper. It just says leadership is needed everywhere. And the sentence after that is interesting because it came out of some email debates I was having with people when we had an early draft of the paper. And one of the comments was exactly what's in that paper there. You know, a mature organization is one where the line between asset management and organizational management disappears. And I thought, that's a brilliant comment. I'm stealing that. We're going to put it in the paper. And, you know, in terms of what a leader is, I mean, we say that you need leadership, top management, and advocates throughout the company. Or an organization. I guess doesn't have to be a company, but I think people often hear leadership and they kind of associate that with top management. And I think those are different concepts, but you do need leaders in top management of an organization as well. So, I mean, a leader is someone who demonstrates excellence, somebody who inspires, helps colleagues, and makes decisions that create value. And that's not just top management, it's management, it's supervisors, it's field workers, it's people all throughout the organization. And that's really, I think, one of the big pushes from this paper. And we talk about those 3 levels of management and what they can contribute to leadership. And it really is breaking down. I mean, we tend to think of like kind of vertical stovepipes, or at least I do within an organization when we talk about, you know, stovepipes, but you know, you do have those kind of layers going up the organization that need to be broken down and coordinated, and that's where leaders really play a value. And I think the last comment I wanted to make was we talked about advocates as well as top management and advocates. And you know, we mentioned in the paper that asset management advocates provide an essential form of leadership, and it's because they're not necessarily people in formal management roles. You know, they have a management role by actually keeping themselves, their colleagues, focused on what the big picture is. And again, you know, is this the right decision overall? Is this good for us? Is it good for the organization? And you know, I can go on forever, but I think that neatly flows really into the context now of the organization, which you were going to talk about, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That was very good. Appreciate those additional comments in addition to outlining the first section of the paper. And I want to say, first of all, what a pleasure it was working with who I call Mark and Mark. They are very collegial people, and they are an excellent representation of, well, I would say our efforts together are a representation of how we want to be collaborative with the Institute of Asset Management. We had some issues that we were passionate about, but we didn't get overly passionate, and we resolved things, and things went really well. So thanks to Mark and Mark for that. So I'm here to talk about the context of the organization section of the paper. And I fell in love with ISO 55000 when I first read it. And the first section of action items really starts with ISO 55001 5.4. And it's context of the organization. And you shall have a strategic asset management plan that aligns with your organizational objectives. A mission focus, isn't that great? So if you just quickly go through this context of the organization, you can see what leaders can do. The first thing is gain understanding of ISO 55001 and 2. And then on the next page, Nick, the second thing is to require training and certification of key staff, which the Institute of Asset Management has in abundance, and the ALN has also. And then there is the establish a culture of asset management. And I think that's what leaders are most responsible for. And so if we go backwards from this, if the leader says that we are going to improve whatever we're doing, one of the best ways to do that is to use a structured approach to asset management. So the leader can't be interested in tiny changes. this structured approach to asset management enables transformative benefits to be realized by an organization. So the leader has to say, we are going to do something different that's going to dramatically improve things. And once that culture is set, then there's all this training that's available. So really, I look to them to embrace that training. And through that training, they will gain the understanding of ISO 55000, 55001, 55002. And if they train their teams together, there'll be an overabundance of opportunities for dramatic improvements. It'll just flow naturally. I love this approach, and I'm so happy to be an advocate for ISO 55000, and happy that Mark wanted to do the first paper calling out about leadership, because everyone will tell you, everyone says, if the leader isn't on board, you're not going to succeed. So that was a quick look at context of the organization, and now we'll move on to Mark DeClercq.
So thanks, Mike. And I think you mentioned a great word there is transformational, right? And when I picked up this decisive decade from the IAM back in, I think it was the COVID years, I happened to be kind of perusing the site, and I came across this paragraph on a decisive decade. And I was like, wow, that sounds pretty interesting. I wonder what this all is all about. And a couple of things come to my mind is the two words of bold and courageous. You know, to be transformational is to be bold and courageous, right? To be inclusive and diverse with what Mark Knight talked about in a three-dimensional line of sight is to be bold and courageous. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade, but some of my best colleagues were risk and insurance, legal, human resource, chief financial officer, and the accountants, because I gleaned so much this web network. I saw one of the individuals on the line had in the chat about, this being a web network, because it really is. It's kind of enterprise wide. It's a connecting web with different parties and individuals. Being diverse and inclusive, you have to be bold and courageous to kind of tap into that. The competing interests that we're dealing right now in our across the world or in our own countries is a lot, probably compared to many decades ago. We have been so used to kind of thinking more tactically and managing assets rather than more strategic with asset management and its best practices. A lot of the strategic plans in organizations have been either newly created or dusted off and repolished to refocus on value here in the last decade and a half. And being able to cut across the grain and be courageous, be bold, to execute those strategic plans and have a focus on outcomes, which is a big, something big today that we're really kind of revisiting, is the focus on outcomes. You have to be bold and courageous. There's a lot of new technologies that are out there that we're now embracing, and we're using the same funding mechanisms to support those. Well, sometimes you have to be bold and courageous as a leader to bring about a different type of way of thinking, a different type of funding mechanism, a different way of implementing these newer types of technologies or initiatives. So I really like this, the whole thought on this decisive decade, because it really is a turning point, I believe, in our world of how we view the world as asset managers, and asset leadership is going to be critical.
Thank you, Mark. And I totally agree with you. The tools and processes that humanity has developed and is developing, I think, is at the heart of the issue here. It is the tools and processes that we now have that enable these types of collaborations that give us an ability to address a world of problems that we are facing together. And it seems crazy that there's one thing that can help every organization, help the world address these problems. But if every organization in the world improves the management of their assets, we might have a chance of addressing the issues that we're facing. I'm not saying we're going to, but it's the only way that I can think of that we have an ability. So we want every organization in the world to have their leaders understand that they need to improve the management of their assets for whatever reason they want to. Profit, productivity, equity, sustain, any reason. Just please improve, tell your organization to improve. And Mark, I thank you for bringing that decisive decade aspect to this leadership paper, because that's really the heart of the matter. So now we're going to discuss amongst ourselves, and we'll let Jim Dieter go first, but I want to tell the audience, of which you are substantial, thank you all for joining, that there is both a chat section and a Q&A, and we want this to be inclusive. We've got some comments in there already that we'll get to, and after we talk amongst ourselves, we want to address your questions and comments. Jim.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't restrain myself, but picking up on a couple of threads there from Mark and Mark, that the temporal aspect of leadership. First thought is leadership. You see leadership in the titles of positions, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about people that are leaders. And I think a way that people become leaders in organizations is when an opportunity presents itself, they are one. They have the ideas, they have the ways to help the organization move forward. In an asset management perspective, it might be, we all know that a lot of times the reason organizations get started isn't because of some, crystal ball vision, but rather it's something goes horribly wrong. And somebody needs to step up with a solution. And the way change happens is usually gradually, but it has the chance to happen rapidly when people have a plan ready to go and show leadership when the situation arises. And that can be anywhere within an organization. Which I just briefly want to get to. Another point is that where asset management starts in organizations, and we heard several examples of this in everybody's comments, it can start in very different places. It can start in IT, it can start in maintenance and liability, it can start in finance, it can start in senior leadership. But wherever it starts is the ground that you have to build on. And that's where the leadership needs to emerge. And, at some point, to Mike's point of senior management involvement, of top management, is top management needs to be convinced. And that is that advocate role, and is leadership in itself, to be sure, to be able to make that pitch.
Ursula, you've had leadership positions throughout your career. What would have changed if you had ISO 55000 from the beginning of your leadership positions?
I think I was very fortunate, actually, Mike, in the fact that I started my career sort of early 90s, and I got involved in asset management in the early 90s as well. So I was very fortunate. And whilst there wasn't a standard to begin with, I'm sure many people on the call will know that the Institute of Asset Management did some work with the British Institute the British Standards Institute to develop PAS 55. And so we had PAS 55 from sort of 2004. And that obviously preceded any work that came along with the ISO, and became a document that was certainly used by the first ISO committee, along with other information to help think about how that first ISO 55000 came about. And it's not an accident that it's called 55000. It was registered to link with the PAS. I think setting out standards, for me, one of the fundamental things is having a common lexicon. You know, one of the biggest things about asset management, and it creates certainly the most interesting discussions, is the ability to share across industries and across different environments. And that common lexicon was a really important thing. So that common language was a really important thing of the original PAS document, as well as many other aspects that we associate with asset management, such as how you manage risk and thinking about line of sight. The original line of sight concept came into the original PAS document as well. And I think those concepts have really been so important to embed. So coming back to your question about my leadership journey, because I was involved in the Institute of Asset Management, and because I was involved in the development of some of these standards and some of these documents, I was extremely fortunate to be able to be at the forefront of taking some of these concepts into organizations, and also liaising with other organizations who were doing the same thing. And I think that's one of the biggest things, the biggest benefits, is being able to have that common standard and being able to share and learn, understand what best practices, what other things that, you know, you see other things other people are doing, and be able to think about how that could be applied in your environment. And I think that's a massive step forward.
So you've seen top leaders be exposed to standards, and how have you seen them adopt them and change culture? Is there anything you can comment on that?
Yeah, so I have seen, as you can imagine, through a career that spanned sort of 30 years in a asset owning environment, I have seen a lot of different leaders. And a lot of people at a senior level. And, you know, one of the things that the paper does talk about is the engagement with top management, and that is one of the things that comes out very strongly in the ISO as well. I think the really key thing with engaging people is not necessarily here's the standard, but it's much more about what the standard and what applying asset management, or more importantly, can give you. I mean, Mark DeClercq talked about value, and I think that is really key. You know, to be able to think about value, and particularly outcomes, understand outcomes. That's really, really key for how adopting an approach where you've got an asset management system and you're considering all the wider aspects of asset management. It is really key, is how it's linked with the value and the outcomes, because that is going to interest very senior people.
Thank you. Mark, DeClercq's head nodded the most when Ursula mentioned having a common taxonomy. So I am going to ask Mark if he wants to add to that.
Sure. Thank you. Agreed. Sometimes in organizations that it can be interpreted at one level, particularly the C-suite level, and have a different interpretation at the middle management level, and a third interpretation down at the boots on the ground level, the frontline forces, right? It's interesting that they're all talking about the same thing, but having that common lexicon and being able to understand it allows the decision-making body, such as a board or a commission, to grab on and resonate with that same lexicon when they're making the decision for approving resources. It could be funding, it could be staffing, it could be equipment, it could be whatever that is, or approving policies that are in alignment with asset management. I think is really, really important. And that point that you made also, Ursula, about value, you know, a lot of times we see an asset manager position be created from a CEO that waves a magic wand and all of a sudden it appears within the middle of the organization, right? Not at the top, not the C-suite, but it's smack dab in the middle. And so there are certain values associated with that position, right? So having the CEO perhaps had some measures of value in that position being created could have been, I'm struggling with the silos in my organization and the culture that has been established from precedents. Perhaps the asset manager position with the right qualification for that position execute the values of creating this harmony, these line of sights in three different dimensions, like Mark Knight had mentioned, reach across the aisles and integrate silos of excellence within the organization so that we can create a better coordinated activity amongst our organization as a whole. I thought was really, really key to what Ursula said about value, but you know, the value that is associated with the position that we're in within an organization, like an asset manager. And how do you bring the leadership qualities of that into the position to be, like I said, bold and courageous, to be different, to cut across the grain of the culture that's been weaved for decades and do it differently, because a lot of the, like I said, you know, the competing interests in our world today are requiring us to be that much different, to be that much bold and courageous, to realize the value in the positions that have been created for the good of the organization and the people, planet, and processes.
Bringing it back to what leaders can do, I was mentioning, you know, first of all, is established culture, and language is a key part of culture. So if a leader wants to start doing something, establishing that taxonomy, establishing a lexicon, creating phrases that everybody knows it means the same thing is a key thing. Mark Knight, you've been taking notes. I was going to ask you specifically about examples of leadership from your career that you might like to highlight, but I'll let you tick off your notes before you address that.
Yeah, okay. I'll ignore the question then, because I forget so much stuff. You know, it goes in one ear and out the other ear. So I scribble and take notes. And I also want to try and address Tammy Whipple's question while I go on. But Mark DeClercq, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with Mark over the last 3 years, but he never stops giving me things that, you know, give me ideas. And you know, a lot of what he said, I want to, and what, you know, you were saying before that. I mean, so having a taxonomy is great if you can implement it. But again, with silos, I mean, yeah, business people might use the same words to IT and OT people and to operations, and they get in a meeting and they think they're talking, you know, on the same page, but they're kind of talking across each other. So I think one of the things as asset managers we can do is kind of help break down those silos by being in the rooms and getting that common understanding. And I think, yeah, you need specialists, but you need generalists. And one of my colleagues is a retired Army colonel, and we were having this debate a couple of weeks ago, and he basically looked at me like I was dumb and said, "Why do you think they call generals generals?" It's because they get exposed to all parts of the army as they get to the top. So when they're making plans, you know, they understand how all the pieces work together. And I think one of the things, like, so bold and courageous, I mean, you never stop learning. One of the things I look for in people when I hire them is intelligence and enthusiasm. And that's important, because you can hire somebody who knows a lot of stuff, but you're still going to keep learning. So, you know, I think what I'm looking to build is a culture of fun and success, because once you've got a strong culture, and if it's the right culture, it's difficult to change. Now, if you've got a culture that's not so great, that's a problem. And that's where change management has a big impact. And that may end up getting woven into what the global forum's doing in the future. But, to Cecilia's comment about, a leadership web, it's kind of, when you take those horizontal and vertical components and put them together, it really is, it is like a web. And that's where the asset management advocates, I think, add an incredible amount of value in terms of communicating. I mean, you look at, I think every company I've worked for at some point, when we've looked at why things haven't been going as well as they could, it always boils down to lack of communication. So I think strong culture and communication is really important. And Tammy said, can we provide some ways leaders that are not in top management can show the value of creating an asset management culture? To me, the answer is maybe a little oversimplistic, but it's demonstrate success. So the example I gave about that Lou Cripps had mentioned at the IAM North America conference, in the standard it says, top management need to be engaged. So running to top management and showing them ISO 55000 and saying, you need to support me. You're going to get, well, I've got 250 other standards that I'm supposed to be supporting. What makes you special? So I think being able to develop culture and early successes that you can then demonstrate are tied back to the standard, to the 39 areas, and having an asset management centric approach, that's what can start to generate value and get top management buy-in. And that doesn't always come from the top. That starts from the bottom and from the middle of the organization and grows out, which is, again, ties back to Cecilia's kind of spider web analogy, I think.
So Jim, you laughed the most when Mark Knight said you can't just bring your leader ISO 55000 and say we need to do this. Can you share some examples of things that you've seen that have worked, whether it's with you, your companies, or any presentations or examples that you can cite?
Sure. Well, let me give it a little context first. I think we all are familiar probably with that technology adoption curve, the bell curve, and I think, we're at different places in different parts of the world. But I think, we're moving from innovation to early adopters is where we are. There's still lots of innovation going on. And when I hear someone say, well, prove to me that I should do this and that it's, how much money it's going to put in my pocket, I go, oh, you're early majority. So because you're interested, but you need proof. And perhaps lacked what Mark DeClercq said, that boldness of having the passion and understanding of what's possible. So the bottom line is, this is the most asked question in asset management is prove to me that this is a good idea. And if we could bottle that, boy, we could sell a lot of it. So, there's lots of stories, and we have in various industries, people talking about it. The issue is in for-profit organizations have no motivation to share their success stories because it's a market advantage. And if we talk about government and government entities, they're judging on a slightly different scale that doesn't necessarily quickly translate, into dollars and cents. It may, but value can be, of course, value is achieving your objectives, and those can be somewhat different. But yeah, we get this question all the time, and a variant of it is. One way to perceive the situation is, well, you're already doing asset management. It's just a structured approach to doing it. My elevator speech used to be, and I actually used it with the head of the organization I worked for, who had no idea who I was, but in an actual elevator, and said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I do asset management. And he said, well, what's that about? And I said, well, we have X $million worth of assets and no structured approach to managing it. That got his attention. It got his attention. So, the stories continue to emerge, the success stories, and our, Mike is, with the Australian Asset Management Council have a series on value, working to address that. And obviously IAM conference and other places, there's lots of topics about it and books from IAM members like Ursula.
So thank you, Jim. And Ursula, I'd like to ask you that same question before I address a couple things for Tammy. First of all, one example that we have had at the, we've been able to present at the National Academy of Sciences, and a gentleman from Sodexo came and said, we went through ISO 55000 in-house because we understood it would be good for us. And we realized such significant benefits that we established an ISO 55000 asset management consulting division in our global company. So that's like, whoa, okay, so that's a clear winner. And also, Jim, thank you for plugging the ALN and Asset Management Council's Value and Benefits from Asset Management series. So we've got case studies, and Tammy, you can contact me. I'll get you some of that information. And then also, we are starting a series on March 1st with one of our members. It's called a BIM storm, an online brainstorm using building information models, where we do a virtual asset management project. And by being involved with it and seeing the activities in this fake project, you can bring the results back and say, hey, this is what we did in this virtual project. Why don't we do this for real? So those are just a couple examples. Ursula, what do you think are ways that leaders who are not in top management can show the top management value in asset management?
This might be a bit of heresy, but I think getting on with it. Because if you come back to what Jim said, asset management is stuff we all do. We all do it in our lives, never mind working in our organizations. And we might not think about it that way, but we do. And so actually, if you've got a groundswell of people in an organization, and they're keen to get on and do it, then get on and do it. You're not going to get into trouble for doing it, because you're going to be doing things that are going to help, and they're going to improve. And that's what everyone is really tasked with doing in their working lives, is improving things, moving things forward, making them more efficient. There's lots of different ways of describing it. And so if you are really in that position where you don't think you're going to get that senior buy-in to begin with, then get on and do it. Because with getting on and do it, you'll be able to demonstrate the benefit of doing it. It sort of comes back to some of the other points that people have been making. And it sort of picks up on the point that Loretta has asked about what happens when you lose that senior person. If you are that dependent on the senior person and you haven't got all of the things, you haven't got the alignment within the business and all the people working together to do it, and your top person leaves, then you are at risk of things starting to slow down or not move forward. So in fact, the best thing to do is to have people working at all levels in the organization and really being really committed to move asset management forward as an organization, and not just be dependent on somebody from the top agreeing that it's a good idea and then basically telling all the troops that that's a great idea.
Thank you, Ursula. I was going to follow up with asking you to address Loretta's question about what happens when top leadership leaves. And yes, there's a need to establish the culture of asset management so that, as in the military, if any leader goes down, somebody else can step up and carry the flag forward. So one way of addressing the question, Loretta, is if there is a leader who's advancing asset management that you see, make sure that there's a culture built around that person's, and that person creates a culture, support that person, so that if anything happens, the program continues. Mark DeClercq is anxiously wanting to address that.
Thank you. I want to expand upon what Ursula said, because it's a good point. And with Loretta's question, you know, the organization people part of asset management tends to get overlooked. And where some of the how-tos is looking at one's succession plan. As part of the asset management system, the human side of it, the organization of people, looking at the succession plan, looking at the org chart, and where are the gaps? You know, where are the gaps in competency, the competency framework for what you're doing now for managing assets versus how you want to do it in the near and long-term future. We're actually doing asset management. That's a gap in itself. Cognitive thinking styles, right? Okay, and if you're used to cloning yourself, your cognitive thinking style being an evaluator or strictly an analysis, because that's the way you think, that really goes against diversity and inclusiveness. You really need people that are catalysts. You need people who are entrepreneurs. You need people who are ambassadors and can relate to other people and be relators. And being diverse and inclusive in your recruiting practices on that succession plan with those types of mindsets really helps build the constant, which is asset management and the asset management system, right? And the leadership then grows over time. You grow from within and less dependent on the external markets and the struggles that we're having with recruiting. So it does speak volumes to really build upon that people side, the pipeline, the leadership pipeline. I read a book here recently that talked about the leadership pipeline and how you can grow leaders within an organization as they move up the different managerial layers within an organization with a lot of clarity when it comes to the skill sets that need to be at each one of those positions, the values associated with those positions, and the priorities associated with those positions. It all melds together in this weave of a great succession plan that helps make asset management culture a more constant rather than being pressured when it comes to attrition or other types of external impacts to an organization.
Mark, that's an excellent plug for the extensive training available from the IAM and ISO 55000 A55K professional certification that the ALN offers. Mark, tonight I've been noting that you've been writing. So what would you like to say?
I think it's just a nervous thing. I just kind of doodle and take notes, but I'm the only one who hasn't been invited to pile in on Loretta's question, so I'm going to do that because it's actually a great question, and I heard two talks last year that actually addressed that very topic, and one of them, I may get the details wrong, but I think it was a municipal organization. So not only did they have people that were kind of promoted into positions, but also sort of appointed officials, and each of them, you've got different turnover times in terms of tenure and when people just quit and go to other jobs. And they looked at the kind of a 5-year or whatever it was projection and figured how many dozen management changes they would have to have and keep their continuity of their asset management program going. And it's like, how the heck do we do this? Because you don't want the next manager to come in and say, well, focusing on XYZ was great, but ABC is the new focus. And the answer is actually in ISO 55001 anyway. It talks about developing your asset management objectives through statements of principle rather than details, and putting that in a brief policy document. Because if performance, cost, risk, put safety in there. I mean, if you were an electric utility, for example, I mean, what manager is going to come in and suddenly say, well, I'm not interested in improving performance, or I'm not interested in reducing risk, or, I mean, safety is not that important. So if you can build your policy around those high-level principles and then tie that directly into the program, through the SAMP, and the policy, is accepted and published within the company, that's a great way of giving you some insulation against people coming in and trying to do U-turns, I think.
Yes, Jim. And Jim, so address this and then make your final comment, because after you're done, we're going to go around and let everyone make their final comment.
This could be my final comment. That's good. So, Mark Knight's comments, excellent. And I'm sitting here thinking, he's thinking of some very, perhaps you could be viewed as micro, but how could they be not more important than safety? But there's also the macro concerns like ESG, where we see asset management moving in the direction of being an important component of ESG considerations for organizations. Back to the people, planet, and process, thoughts. But I think that points up just the breadth of knowledge and experience that are useful to have in asset management. My personal experience would be if you're involved in asset management, good for you. It's a great field to be involved in and to be starting in that, because it's an expanding profession in which there's going to be many more opportunities in the future. That's not like being an accountant where you're going to have to work your way through a structure that's been around hundreds of years. So it's a really good opportunity. And, to be a leader, try to get as varied experience as you can, working in different environments with different sorts of assets, with different groups of people at different levels of the organization. And you'll be ready to be a leader when your opportunity emerges. And thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. And I do want to emphasize again, Jim made the statement about ISO 55000 saying asset management is the coordinated activity and that leadership is coordinating the activity. So I really like that. So I wanted to bring it up. Mark DeClercq, final short comments, please.
Be bold and courageous. I'll leave that because I think that we are feeling the final straw that's breaking the camel's back. Read the history, understand your institutional knowledge, because how you know where you've come from is going to help chart where you're going to go when you're weaving asset management and leadership and coordinated activity all together in this next decisive decade.
Excellent. Thank you. Mark Knight.
Asset management's a great way to expand your horizons and meet new friends.
Yes, it has been a pleasure getting to know both of you better. And Ursula, this is so good having our first program. We have so many questions that we cannot get to them all. Can we say that this will continue on the IAM forum and we'll bring questions and comments over there? So we'll keep going.
Absolutely. So we've got an IAM discussion forum, which it's free to join. There's no issue with anyone joining. And what I suggest we do is we can take some of the questions that we haven't answered and try and get them on there and see if we can get some discussion going, and we'll promote them on LinkedIn and see if we can get other people engaged and involved who maybe haven't been able to join us today. So we'll definitely do that. There's a great opportunity to do that. So yes, that definitely. The final thing I just wanted to say was we sometimes think that, that there is a lot of challenges, and there are a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities. And I think we almost always should look for the opportunities as well as the challenges.
Well, I don't think there's any better way to end that. So I am just going to say thank you to all of our speakers. Thanks especially to Mark Knight and Mark DeClercq. It was a pleasure working with you to get this paper out. And thank you to the audience. We've had a really strong showing. We appreciate your interest. We appreciate your passions for this. And thank you for attending. And let's keep the discussion going in the IAM forum.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.